Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is someone that I think you're going to really enjoy hearing from, and someone that I thought looked familiar when we talked about having her on the show, and it turns out that we met each other way back in 2009, the first time I went to TED Active. And I think that was probably Tania's first time. With me today is Tania Luna. She's the co-founder of LifeLabs Learning and the author of The Leader Lab, Core Skills to Become a Great Manager Faster. So Tania, thank you for joining us. I know that's your new book, right? The Leader Lab?
Yes, I'm so excited for this reunion. It's like a surprise reunion I didn't even know I was having. And yes,
Right.
that's right. That's the book.
Cool. Good. Well, yeah. So, I mean, what a time. Like, let's talk about that for a quick second, because, I tell people these days that I went to TED the first time in 2009, but it's just because it's too hard to explain the difference between TED and TED Active. Now, honestly, I think TED Active was kind of like the kids' table for TED, but
Yeah.
but Kelly
The
Stetson.
rowdy kids, like the fun rowdy kids.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, lots of people started coming from TED because they heard that TED Active was more fun.
Yeah.
But it was run by TED, and Kelly Stetzel, who at that point was the woman who chose all the speakers for TED, ran TED Active, and she wanted it to be like a place where people could actually take action on these ideas and meet each other and do stuff. And so she would always tell us, you are at TED, right? This is TED too, even though we all knew it was the kids' table, right? But it was so fun. And it was, for me, that was a real game changer. Like, do you trace anything for yourself back to that moment, Tania?
Well, what's interesting is, so I'm a pretty intense introvert and would like pay good money to not have to attend an event. So
That's funny.
So it's, an unusual thing for me to actually want to go to a place with a bunch of people. I love people, don't get me wrong. I love one-on-one conversation. I love small groups. Once it gets to like over 5 people, my brain starts kind of panicking.
Yeah.
But it's weird if I think back. This place was a place where I made friends that I don't think I ever would have made from
never.
all over the world.
Yeah,
that I
me
still
too.
stay in touch with till today. And for me, one of the things that was so exciting about that format is that, typical TED, big grown-up table TED, there's such a high power distance. It's all about power distance in many ways.
Yeah.
And TED Active really created this space where it felt like we were creating it together. And that's my frame, because actually the latest book I'm writing is about distributing power. And so much about TED Active was about like this great distribution of power. And I think that's what was so special about it.
Tania, because I noticed that too, but I didn't have your language for it. What I always told people was like, I get the feeling that 99% of the people at TED Active felt like they got in on maybe a clerical error, and and everybody else there was smarter and better and everything. So it's one of the few places I've ever been where everybody thought everybody else just might be smarter than they were. And so it was so great. It was so great. I'm like, how could we create that on a regular basis,
Well, it's so funny that you say that, because the exact thing you just said is something that, so at the company that I co-founded, now I'm chair of, called LifeLabs Learning, we do manager and team training.
Yeah.
One of the things that I always hear from our own team is, how did I get into this company? Everyone here seems so much smarter than me. And everyone says it.
Perfect.
And so I wonder if there is something to a dedication to, like, we're co-creating together versus there are, the sage on the stage people and then the people in the audience. Like, there's something about this, like, we're doing it together that creates this beautiful combination of excitement to be a part of a thing and humility that keeps you, wanting to be a part of it versus feeling like you're better than.
Well, so now for everybody that's listening and for you, Tanya, I just want to point out, hopefully no one will throw rotten tomatoes at me for saying this, but I think you have a double superpower. And if you're listening and you're like Tanya, I think you have a double superpower too. And how I would identify it is, number one, you are an introvert. Right? Because you don't have that great temptation to get up be the sage on the stage. Like, you don't want those people to notice. You just much rather co-create something, be a part of it, keep it feeling intimate. So that's one superpower. And the second superpower that I have committed myself to talking more about lately, and I just went to India and talked about something similar to 700,000 people, but that's a whole other story. That was insane. That was totally crazy. It was like madness. I don't know if you've ever been to India, but it sort of starts out on the verge of madness and then we just descended right into it. But
yeah, I got to teach in India and it was one of the most amazing experiences, which we can totally talk about. And a lot of that also has to do with a sense of humility and eagerness to learn and versus this like I know better than mindset. But yes, please go
so
on.
Here's the second
the second superpower, and I'm preparing for the digital Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, no, hopefully there won't be any. But it is a generalization. So in the bell curve of experience, I think because you're a woman, you are better at having that we attitude as well. I've gotten really obvious to me that in the bell curve of my experience of female leaders, they're much better at sharing, not all, but they're much better in general at sharing that we did this together.
Yeah. I mean, we're socialized to be communal, most of us. So like the definition of leadership is less about what's in it for me and more about what's in it for us.
Yeah. Which I think is a great thing for leaders, right? Like whatever.
Hey, I'll take any advantage I can get. If I can flip some of the disadvantages into advantages, I'm game.
Because yes, there are disadvantages too, right? But yeah, no, I think because that's what stands out for me. I'm starting to some days feel jealous that I'm not more of an introvert. I'm like, maybe I'd be more successful.
I don't know about that. I feel like, if I think about the people even within my company who are passionate advocates of kind of this co-created approach, I think there's a pretty decent balance of introvert and extrovert. I agree that I've probably everything I do is probably an elaborate coping mechanism to not front and center, and I've just figured out a way to make it work. But I think it's just a matter of how you use that strength. It's more, I think, about the value, and if you have this value of, hey, I want to make any group that I'm a part of stronger, versus I want to be stronger than any group that I'm a part of, then as an introvert, there's a way to do that. And as an extrovert, there's probably a different way to do that. But I think there's hope for you.
Well, thank you. I'm glad.
As a male extrovert.
Here I am. Everything opposite. So listen, let me go for the first most obvious question, because I read the title of your new book, The Leader Lab, Core Skills to Become a Great Manager Faster. And I know that out there on the interwebs, people love to make this distinction of like leaders are somehow better and managers are somehow not as cool. And are you a manager or are you a leader? And I kind of have always thought that was a pretty dumb distinction, but what would you say about that since it's right there in your title?
Yeah, I'm kind of over it, honestly. There are so many distinctions of, well, a leader does this and a manager does this. We went for the term manager because it tends to be the job title. And, there's pilot training, there's surgeon training, there's very little, very good quality manager training. And I think of it as, for better or worse, it's the job title that people with leadership responsibilities are given. I think there's lots of other title options. We actually within LifeLabs Learning don't even use the word manager, because the word manager to me feels like it has too much of a connotation of control. So we put a lot of effort into saying, hey, as a manager, it's not that you're managing people. It's not that you're controlling people. You don't manage people, you manage conditions. You manage the environment that people are in to be able to bring out the best in them. Ideally. I don't know about you, but I've never enjoyed being managed or feeling
No,
managed. I don't like
no,
managing
no.
myself. So
The
yeah.
word that comes right before that is micro,
Yeah,
right?
exactly, exactly. So we went with manager because it tends to be the title. Um, and I would also say that leadership is something that you can do regardless of what your title is, and
Oh,
something increasingly we're seeing across organizations that everyone has to do. And
yeah.
so, you know, it's the distinction between leadership as the set of skills and behaviors, and manager as the job title.
Yeah. Good. Well, so I mean, and I definitely agree with you. Like one of the things I always remind people of in my trainings is you are a leader. Like,
Yeah.
don't like, there's no question here over here with me about you. You are a leader. My only question is, it doesn't matter where you are in the hierarchy. My only question is, are you aware that you're a leader
Right.
and what a powerful leader you are? And are you leading people in the direction you mean to be leading them in? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there used to be this distinction of like, well, leaders lead people in the realm of the unknown and managers manage the known and the
Right.
predictable. I'm like,
Uh-huh.
really? Is anything known and predictable these days anymore? Let's get out of this like, myth that anything is controllable and predictable. We're all in a space where we have to be leading. Some of us are just doing it formally, some of us are doing it informally.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, the illusion of control, right?
Yeah, that's over.
Well, this show is Speak Like a Leader. And I wonder if you've got any particular thoughts, out of the Life Labs and your Leader Lab about communication in particular. Like,
Oh my gosh, so many. I mean, so much of leadership is in how you get the message to land. And really I think so much about the message ending with the receiver.
yeah.
Often as leaders, we're like, what do I want to say? That's like 20% of it.
Yeah.
80% of it is how are you going to get it to land?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so a lot of what we do at LifeLabs Learning and what the book, The Leader Lab, is based on is our research on what is it that great leaders and managers are doing differently. And if I think about when it comes to communication, there's probably three things that stand out most of all. One is what we call linking up. So, what we notice about great leaders, whether formal or informal, is that they will always, whenever they're saying, hey, I need you to do this thing, or this decision was made, or here's a piece of information, whatever it is, they follow that with a link up to why that matters. So, and here's why we came to this conclusion, or here's why this matters, or here's the reasoning behind it. So it's this, I think about it as like relying on context versus control.
Right.
So much of kind of traditional leadership is just about directives. I'm telling
Right.
you what to do. And so much about effective modern day leadership is about that transparency into context, not just here's what I want, but here's why this thing matters, the link up.
So, Tanya, we are talking while the war of aggression waged by Russia in Ukraine is just raging on.
I'm from
And
Ukraine.
what's that?
I'm from Ukraine, so
You
that's
are.
I
Well,
was
I've
born
been
there.
watching that.
It's a whole
I've been
other
watching.
experience. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, and I've been watching that really, really closely. And I apologize for talking over you.
Oh gosh, not at
It's a
all.
little hard on the when there's
I come from a
like
everyone talks at the same time culture, so
okay, good, all
to
right.
me that's a sign of a good conversation.
Well, I mean, I'm pulling for Ukraine, which is probably obvious, and I'm paying, maybe too much attention to it, and I've been donating and doing whatever I think I can. I think it's way more important than most people realize. But to go back to your
Yeah.
point, one of the things that we've seen just unequivocally in that war is the difference between a top-down
Mm,
lack of context command structure versus what Ukraine is doing, which was much more a U.S./NATO style, where the whole point for U.S. and NATO command is to give people an idea of commander's intent, is what they call
mm,
it, right?
mm.
It's not just go take that hill. It's like, go take that hill because here's what we need to accomplish, right? And when people understand what we need to accomplish, they don't just go die on that hill for a stupid reason. If
Yeah.
they hit, really big resistance on that hill and they can just do some
You can
other
make a good
thing.
decision, right? You
Right.
can't make a good, independent, agile decision without that context. Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating and perfect parallel to what we're seeing even on the micro level on the leadership side. And I think it's
Right.
because, going back to the fact that like things have just been changing so quickly and the future is not going to look like our past. And
Mm-mm.
that's always been the case, but I think we're accepting it more now. The command and control approach seems much quicker and more efficient on the
Right.
surface because I
Right.
can just tell you what to do and then you don't question it and you just go ahead and do it.
Right.
First of all, that's not going to stick around too long when you have a bunch of people who have strong opinions and perspectives and have the power and the autonomy to challenge it.
Right.
But even if people are not going to challenge it, to your point, do you really want people to mindlessly follow a directive that probably won't be any good like
Like
two
5 minutes from
like
now,
5
right?
minutes
Yeah.
from now, exactly.
Totally.
So we have to be so much more resilient, so much more um active. Back to Ted versus Ted active, right? We have to all be co-creating this reality that we're in, and that means that context is going to be a much stronger, more helpful, and also much more motivating and uplifting
Yeah.
form of leadership than an attempt to control.
Yeah.
And so the micro behavior, that's what we get excited about LifeLabs Learning, because it's one thing to be like, give people your intent, share the reasoning, and that people like buy into it, they believe in it, but then they're like, but how do I actually do it? And so we train people on making link up statements. So literally
Right.
saying, here's my request, here's why this matters, or here's my feedback, the reason I'm sharing this is, or the impact of that behavior that I'm seeing is. So just constantly doing that link up practice. That I would say is number one. I can
I
share more
love
if
that.
you want.
I think that's just fabulous. And if that's so that is, I think, a leadership habit worth developing, like yellow stickies everywhere till
Everywhere, just link up.
yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
we actually, well, I'll notice actually, like when we teach these in live workshops or, we have digital tools and things like that as well. But one of the things we really try to focus on within our training is making the tool feel very tangible. So
yeah,
you can't see this as you're listening, but I'm like moving my finger up to link up, and I'll
link
see
up.
like
Yeah,
in workshops, people will literally, as they're talking, move their finger up. And I think
right.
it's so important to get down to something so tangible and so concrete so
It's
that
a
your
great
brain is
idea.
like, got it, link up. Have I done
Yeah.
that link up yet? Yeah. So that's one. Should I go on and share
Oh,
some others?
please.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. I said three, but I'm lying. I can share way more, but I'll try to stick
Okay.
with three.
Okay.
Okay. The next one I'll say is, if we look at what great leaders do differently, usually when you think leadership and you think communication, you think of statements that end in periods. But actually, when we study great leaders, the majority of their statements end in question marks. And so the kind of micro aspect of that is asking more questions. When we look at even a 15-minute interval of an individual speaking to their direct report or a team member one-on-one, when we look at, actually, pop quiz for you, if you were to predict, let's say in the US, 15-minute interval, how many questions would you think the typical person with a manager role would ask in a 15-minute interval?
I mean, if I probably one or
Oh,
none.
good. You're close. Two. So on
Two.
average, it's
Okay.
two.
All right.
When we look at individuals who are rated within their organizations as most effective managers, do you want to guess what that number is?
I mean, it
15
must
interval.
go, it must be double or triple, like
So
six or
it's
eight
10.
or 10. Yeah.
10 questions in a 15-minute interval. And sometimes that question is what we call a playback. Like, this is what I think you said. Is that right? Like, did I get
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
correctly? So
I
it's like
love
sometimes
playbacks.
micro question. Playbacks are wonderful. It's a whole other communication skill I can
Uh
talk
huh.
about forever. But question skills, so much of leadership these days is actually being able to ask instead of tell. And I can go on and on. I mean, truly, I can talk for hours just about the power of questions. But at the heart of it, the most powerful type of question is a question that increases the capacity of the individual that you're speaking with. So I'm not asking so that I can learn. I'm asking so that the individual that I'm giving the question to can expand their own thinking and can expand
Right.
their own capacity to solve problems. And that's something that we see great leaders do very differently. And it's obvious when you start to look at it.
So it's kind of the Socratic method questioning.
Yes, but I think what's important is oftentimes when people hear Socratic method, I don't actually think this is how Socrates meant it, because
Yeah.
Socrates would ask very genuine questions. But I
Right.
think oftentimes people ask questions and they're like leading questions.
Right.
So I
Right.
know the answer and I'm going to ask you a question and you're going to figure it out and
Right.
you're going to know what I know. But
Yeah.
what's different about these great leaders is they're asking very genuine questions that they themselves are willing to not have an attached answer to, so that
Right.
the individual they're asking has this opportunity to kind of expand and shift their way of thinking.
Yeah. Great. Great clarification. Probably that's more what Socrates really was meaning and doing, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because there's this feeling of kind of a collective wonder of let's
Yeah.
figure this thing out together.
I like that. Collective wonder. All right. So what's number 3?
Okay, I will go with what we call de-blurring. And by the way, I was talking before about the link up and making it physical. The sort of physical tip or term that we use for defaulting to questions, we call it a Q step. So the first step you take when someone asks you a question, when someone comes to you with a critique, with a problem, is to make your first step a question. So Q step. So you've got
Okay.
link up, Q step, and then the last one I'll share is what we call de-blurring. So much of communication, especially when you're communicating across distance, across diversity of backgrounds and perspectives and cultures and languages and things like that, so much of communication just simply gets very blurry, meaning, I'm looking at it and I'm seeing one thing, you're looking at it, you're seeing another thing, or maybe we're both looking at it and we're sort of like, I'm not sure, it's a little bit blurry, but I'm just going to run with it.
Right.
We're just seeing that causes so many problems down the line, because within those blur words, is bias lurks within there, confusion lurks within there, miscommunication lurks within there, and so again, it takes a little bit of extra time to link up, to Q step, to deblur. But once you take the time to go, hang on, you just said that we have to get this done as quickly as possible. Just to make sure I understand, what does as quickly as possible mean to you? Or maybe you're saying something like, we have to scale our services. Got it. Let's focus on scaling our services just so that we're on the same page. What's an example of how that would look? How will we measure scaling? So
Right.
as a leader, being the kind of the person looking out for those blur words that are floating around in there, and just
Right.
pausing to ask to Q step and then go, just to make sure that we're actually operating and using the same language, that the message is landing correctly with the receiver. What do these words mean, and how are we measuring them? How will we make them crystal clear?
Yeah. That's fabulous. Yeah. I mean, I just had a guest on um, the last one we recorded, and she said something I thought was really brilliant. She said that like all problems in organizations are just unhad conversations.
Oh,
Like they're
so
conversations
well
that
put.
should have happened, right?
Yeah.
And like that conversation to de-blur what we were even talking about, right? That
Yeah.
didn't happen, and now we're all messed up
I
around
can't
it,
tell you
right?
how often I hear people say, like, complain about someone not understanding them, or complain about, not understanding someone. And I just go, well, what questions did you ask? Or
Yeah.
how did you try to deblur it? And they're like, oh, I didn't. I'm like, there you go.
Yeah.
It's like the simple stuff that, we're just not taught these things. So it requires that muscle memory to do it again and again so that it starts to come more naturally.
Well, and the first one you said, sorry, the somewhere earlier you said something about something that, well, anyway, I didn't get a note about it, but you said something that triggers something for me from my work. One of the things I realized a long time ago is that I was really, really self-righteous about being responsible for what I said, right? Oh, I'm
Mm,
responsible for what I say, which meant really I was checking the box I told you so all the time, right?
that's
But when
so
I'm checked the box I told you so, that means I didn't get what I actually wanted, right? Like it didn't work. So
well,
I'm saying,
and
well,
maybe
I
I said
told you
the
so.
message ends with the receiver.
Right. So
Yeah.
so I got like, oh, wow, I'm stopping early. I could not only be responsible for what I say, I could be responsible for what they hear.
Hmm.
And when I started trying to check the box over there of I landed it versus I told you so,
Yeah.
checking the box I landed it, man, my results totally changed,
Oh, I love that shift. Yeah. Yeah, and you hear this from leaders all the time, people saying things like, "Oh, but I've already told people this," or "I made that
Yeah,
clear."
but
But it's
did
like,
they hear you? Yeah, right.
yeah, just because I think I was clear doesn't mean that I was.
Right. Well, and I've heard the saying somewhere that like ultimately communication is what happened over there. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what you said, right, or what you thought. Communication is actually what happens over there.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I think also we can be more transparent about the fact that, communication involves both parties. It's a relationship, right? It's a
Yes.
dynamic experience. One of the metaphors that we sometimes use within LifeLabs Learning is there's a shipping department and there's a receiving department when it comes to the message, right? So I could have
Yeah.
done a really good job shipping my message, but someone still has to receive that message. And if they
Right.
didn't receive it, as the shipper, I can't just be like, "Well, too bad you didn't receive it." And as the person
Yeah.
who didn't receive it, I also can't be like, "Well, too bad you didn't send it." So
Right.
ideally, and this is where this idea of everyone has to take some responsibility for leadership is so, so important because it
Yeah.
also can't just be on one individual to be responsible for sending and for making sure it lands. But at
Right.
least I can, as a leader, I can put in the effort to check, did it land? And hey, can we work together to figure out how can I get these messages to you in a way that is helpful and productive? And what can you do on your part to be able to ask me questions and pull from me the information that you need? Because it's got to be so much more collaborative than we've ever seen in our history of working together before.
Yeah, boy, amen. Like it's all just going so much faster and so much. I mean, if there ever was control, it's gone now, right? It's truly the illusion of control these days.
But I think it could be such an exciting thing if we just kind of dive deep into that,
Yeah.
like, yes, there's something that feels more maybe comforting or soothing about control. But you mentioned earlier that you surf, and maybe surfing has gotten you into a little bit of trouble lately. But I'm guessing, I've never surfed, but I've watched from a
Yeah.
safe distance.
Yeah.
It seems like the joy of it in many ways is the unpredictability,
Yeah.
is the joy of what's going to happen, and let me figure out how to adjust to it in the moment versus predict exactly what's going to happen. And that's an exciting way to live if we have the skills for it.
Well, it's funny that you'd say that because I totally agree with you. And one of the things that I realized a few years ago is that I think mostly people misinterpret what surfers mean when they say go with the flow.
Oh, can you say more about that?
Yeah. So I think that from outside, go with the flow sounds kind of like whatever, like, oh, yeah, let it
Oh,
happen, but
relaxed.
right. So I'll tell you what, when you're out there in like double overhead waves and you're trying to catch one of those puppies and not get killed, you cannot control the ocean, right? Like you fight the ocean, you lose, period.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
just no question about that. So you are completely on some level at the mercy of the elements in the
Mm.
ocean. And you're just trying to be in this very, very specifically small place where you're able to catch the wave. You're not going to get thrown over by it and
Mhm.
it's not going to just pass you by. So it's a really small area you're trying to be in, and all kinds of stuff is going on. And you just kind of have to go with the flow, but it takes totally relaxing in some moments. And then it takes scrambling like crazy in other moments, and all of that is going with the flow, so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not as passive as it
Yeah, it's
sounds.
it's not like you're sort of like floating like a relaxed starfish on
Yeah,
the water, just chilling.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so going with the flow, there's an intensity and a skill and a determination to it, but it starts with the acceptance that the flow is more powerful and completely out of your control.
Well said. Yes. Yeah, well said.
And I guess with surfing, it's a feature of the experience versus a bug.
Yeah,
Whereas,
totally.
right, like
Yes.
you, like, I don't know, you're probably not going to be like, let me surf through this completely predictable wave if that was even a possibility. I mean,
Mm,
maybe for learning, but I imagine that that kills the joy and the thrill of it. And I think, in our business lives or wherever, as a listener, you are a leader, looking at uncertainty and unpredictability as a feature versus a bug could open up a whole new way of looking at things. And then we get
Yeah.
to rebuild how we are as leaders. We get to rebuild how our businesses respond to those waves that are outside of our control and more powerful, and learn to ride them versus, getting a bunch of sand up your nose over and over and complaining about it.
Yeah, right. I think you're totally right. I mean, and in that having unpredictability be a feature means there's all kinds of opportunity, right?
Right.
Because, like, hey, watch for the uncertainty. Let's fill in those gaps that make sense for us. And
Which I think goes back to, talking like a leader. It's so much more about the conversation that goes both ways. And that's
hmm
part of the skill and it's part of the joy of it. It's okay, I can take responsibility for linking up and cue stepping, asking good questions, de-blurring, but that's only exciting to use as a skill set when I'm in this dynamic back and forth conversation with
right,
others, because what
right.
I ask and what I say will inform what they say. And then hopefully I'm listening and absorbing that. And we're co creating something back to where we started with TED Active. We're co
Yeah,
creating something. And that's what is, I think, most exciting about being a leader today. You get to be a part of being a catalyst of this unpredictable thing
yeah.
versus trying to manage something that is, you know, if you succeed, things work out as you expected. That's no fun.
You're right.
Like ideally you succeed and you help bring to life something better than you could have imagined.
Yeah, I love that. So, Tanya, we only have about 5 more minutes left, I think. Is there anything that I didn't bring up that you would like to talk about? Like, let me let you steer for a minute.
Oh gosh, I wasn't expecting this turn in the conversation. Okay, yes,
The
fine. I will take.
unexpected.
I'll take advantage of this to get up on my little soapbox
Please.
before.
Yeah, please.
One of the things that I briefly mentioned before is you talked about the difference between leader and manager, and I was saying, we expect training for pilots, we expect training for surgeons, but managers, leaders are the result of doing this job poorly. The stakes are incredibly high. It's people's quality of life, it's the success of a business, it's people's finances. Uh, you know, Scary stuff if you get it wrong. And there's so much pressure these days on leaders to be good, to be effective. And I really think part of the conversation that's missing is, but how do we help leaders develop those skills? How do we start treating it like a craft versus like a talent or like something that you're supposed to figure out through experience alone? I get really frustrated when I hear people talking about leadership as something you just have to learn on the job. Like, why don't we do that for, any other high stakes profession? Of
Right.
course, experience is lovely, but we need incredibly well guided experience so that we can actually learn from those experiences. Otherwise, experience is a really crap teacher. I could be a leader. We see this all the time in our workshop. Someone has been a leader for 10, 20 years and they don't recognize what their own weaknesses are because
Right.
there isn't the immediate feedback. There isn't, yeah, maybe people are quitting, but you don't know which of the things you did at what point, maybe 3 months ago, resulted in them quitting today.
Right.
And that there doesn't seem to be a correlation between how many years someone has been in a leadership role and how effective they are as a leader.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess my little soapbox speech is experience is not enough. And learning on the job is too risky. And really, I think that's why it's so important the work that you're doing to be able to break down what are the skills and the tools and the tactics that leaders need, and for organizations to really invest in those skills as a must have versus a nice to have, because the dangers of hoping to figure it out as you go along are just too high.
But amen, sister. Like, I totally agree with you. And one of the things that I think about a lot, because I I was not always really coachable.
Mm,
I kind of thought I knew better and whatever. And then I realized that in high school, I had just a tremendously successful 4 years in public speaking and debate.
mm,
And when I looked back and thought about why that was, I realized it had very little to do with me. I had a really fabulous public speaking coach in high school at my public high school in Salt Lake City, Utah,
Wow.
at East High. And he was totally bonkers. The guy was just insane, but he loved us and he would do anything for us. So I did anything he asked, right? So purely by accident, I had a great coach and I was coachable, right? And if you look at it, that's how anybody that's really good at stuff does it. Tiger Woods, right? He had multiple coaches. None of his coaches could beat him at golf, or they would have. But together, they had him, because he was coachable, beat pretty much everybody forever, it seemed like, anywhere, Now, why would we do that in golf?
Right.
And not do that for leaders, right? When what you just said is so true. There's so much at stake: quality of life, success of the company, the finances, all the pressure on leaders. And yet we expect them to,
You'll figure it out.
Yeah, right. No, really, right? Really? Yeah. You want to leave it to that?
Yeah.
So I couldn't agree more.
And I love the golf metaphor. No offense to anyone. I also don't want to get hit with Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know why your listeners just have like Rotten Tomatoes.
They got a basket to keep me honest here. Keep me,
to keep us on our toes. Yes, golf, I'm sure, very important. However, if you're putting in more effort into training people to play a sport than helping people develop in something that plays a role, and the experience that I have at work is also going to trickle into the experience I have in my personal life and my relationships,
everywhere,
my family, and everywhere. So let's take it seriously. And if you're listening, you already agree with this. So
yes,
spread the word.
Yes, that's right. Well, so Tania, it's been a total blast, and we kind of had a short moment here. I think we'll have to get together and maybe do part 2 of this down the road a little bit.
That sounds good.
Any final words?
If you're listening and you're thinking this is up your alley, LifeLabs Learning is where we do training for managers, for teams, and my most recent book, it's called The Leader Lab. Check it out. We dive into the research and we go into those behavioral units that I talked about, link up, D-blur, Q-step, things like that. And, part of our goal is to make these skills as accessible as possible so that it's not that a small number of people have leadership skills. These are the skills that we all need today. So check it out.
Fabulous.
Reach out if you have any questions.
Great. And we will put all of your links in the show notes. So if you're listening, those are in the show notes. But Tania, tell us again, your best URL is...
Go to lifelabslearning.com. And if you want to follow my writing or any other things that I'm working on, it's Tania, Tania, Luna, Luna.com.
Fabulous. Great. Okay. We're going to make sure we include all that, links to your book and everything. I think what you're doing is fabulous. It's really great to see you again.
Same here. What an unexpected and delightful reunion. If you're listening, go and reunite with someone today. That is your mini mission. Find someone you haven't talked to in 10 years and just say hi.
And reach out.
It's going to be so fun.
Yeah, good. Well, and listen, offline, I'll have to reconnect you with all the people I'm still in touch. And I'd love for you to just say hello to the people you're still in touch with for me. And thanks for joining us, Tania.
Thank you.
And to you listening, thank you for joining us as well. If you like the show, please share it with a friend or two. And if you would be willing to give us a 5-star rating and some nice comments, that would help other people find the show. And go check out all of Tania's work, because I think it's brilliant and I think you'll love it. And until next time, thank you for joining us here on SpeakLikeALeader.show. Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.